Climate change in New Jersey. I get it. That phrase alone can stir some emotions inside of us. However, I'm here to tell you what climate change is and isn't in New Jersey, and why my job as a meteorologist really should be pretty boring when it comes to talking about climate change. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, it's meteorologist Joe Martucci here. We'll take a look at extreme weather and climate change in New Jersey. I'll start off this as I do every public talk I give, which is a trivia question. In this case, we'll start with this. What was the last time New Jersey had a landfalling hurricane? 2012, 1985, or 1903? The answer? Yeah, 1903. With the Vagabond Hurricane. It was named that because it took a path that made landfall in Atlantic City back in 1903. The path went from the Carolina coast due north, went pretty much along the Garden State Parkway, and then exited into Long Island and the Long Island Sound, and then New England. It wasn't 2012 with Sandy. It was a post-tropical cyclone back in that October 2012 storm, which meant it transitioned from a warm core storm, which is what a hurricane is, to a cold core storm, which is like a nor'easter. All right, we'll talk a little bit about me real briefly. I'm the owner of Cup of Joe Weather and Drone here in New Jersey. We cover the shore like nowhere else through weather media. I reach over 1.1 million people a month on social media and my website alone, and we have sponsors for it. Flood insurance rate reduction through my Surely Safe program with municipalities, and also drone visualization. Whether it's for an event or it's for real estate, I can do that. And I also help people get their Part 107 license to be a commercial drone pilot. Now, important in all of this, when we're talking about climate change or weather specifically, is who to trust. Who can you go to trust? Having one of these two seals from the National Weather Service, the certified digital meteorologist or certified broadcast meteorologist, means that they're at the top of their game for proficiency in weather and communication. It can be on television, which is what the AMS certified broadcast meteorologist seal is, or the certified digital meteorologist seal is as well. I'm thankful enough to have both, and as of 2025, the only meteorologist to have both in the state of New Jersey, and proud of it. Now, let's get into the climate change part, and this is important. Climate change is not a religion. You don't believe in it or not. There are facts and forecasts, and what to do or think or not to think about it is where your beliefs come in. That's where the emotions come in. My job is to tell you the facts and the forecast. My job is not that last part here, and that's what you're going to see in this video. I think sometimes we get it confused. We get them intertwined, but there's separate facts and forecasts and what to think or not to think about it. Now, when it comes to what weather is most deadly, the sexier items, maybe like a tornado or a hurricane, actually ranks in the middle of this. The top one is heat, and flooding's a second place here. Now, in New Jersey, we thankfully are in the single digits for fatalities on most years. However, 2021, with Tropical Storm Ida's remnants, brought 29 fatalities, and most of them were due to flooding. And that's why flooding is second on this list. That is a unfortunate big killer along with heat, which is number one. Now, you can read all this here, and what this is telling you is regardless of, what's happened in recent decades, this is something we haven't seen really in most of Earth's history. In fact, minus an asteroid hitting the Earth or some kind of supervolcano exploding, we haven't seen this rate of climate change in any part of the Earth's history. You would have to go way back to the beginning of the Earth's history when it was still forming and, correlating around a core where we saw these big changes in climate. Since the Earth has been steady, and it's been relatively steady for billions of years, we just haven't seen anything like this, especially when we're talking about the changes in a matter of decades as opposed to a matter of millennia, which is usually how this climate change happens. The natural kind of climate change happens over millennia, not over decades. So, in short, it's getting warmer in New Jersey. Rain's getting heavier, and we're seeing more drought at the same time. We'll go through all this one by one. Let's start with extreme weather trends. We know that with a high degree of observation and reliability and confidence that we're seeing more heat waves, less cold waves, and more heavy precipitation. Things we aren't so sure about is, are we seeing more or less thunderstorms, and are we seeing more intense or less intense thunderstorms? And even with tornadoes, we know what can cause tornadoes more than thunderstorms or wind when it comes to climate change, but we just don't have a lot of reliability with observations. So here's a look at our temperatures for the state of New Jersey throughout its period of record. This goes back to 1895. You see that upward trend, but you see that, hey, compared to this black line, that's the average line, we aren't all that much higher. But that's the 1991 to 2020 average. That's what we as meteorologists say when we're talking about temperatures being above or below average. Hey, this September day is 5 degrees above average. We're referring to the 91 to 2020 climate average. That is re-upped every 10 years, and it goes off a 30-year period. So in 2030, we'll look at a 2001 to 2030 climate average. But look what happens when we look at the entire period of record. Now we see a lot of years that are above this entire period of record average in the past couple of decades. And if you go back to the first 30 years of temperatures here in New Jersey, that average was 50.6. We haven't been there since the mid 1980s. We haven't had a year that would be average for, let's say, 1900 since the mid 1980s here, and we're only getting warmer. So it's important to know your time period because we have different averages based on what you might see. So it's always good when you're looking at something pertaining to climate change, not weather, but climate change, to know what the average time period is. Here's another way of seeing it, and this is from Ed Hawkins' Warming Stripes. Climate Central, which is in Princeton, New Jersey, uses this a lot, and you see more red as you go from left to right on the screen. Not only are we seeing some of our hottest years on record in recent decades, but it's been persistently above average as well. In fact, we don't see a blue on this map, on this chart, on this map until about the year 2000 or so, and that's looking at the entire period of record. So that average is the entire period of record, not the past 30 years. Now, assuming current emissions, where our average temperatures are heading are further south, assuming a moderate emission scenario here. So assuming the way it is, our summers will feel more like Charlottesville, Virginia in 2060 and then Augusta, Georgia by 2100. Again, I'm not saying this is a problem, but I'm just saying that this is what we're seeing. It's for you to decide whether or not that's an issue. Now, when it comes to precipitation, it looks a little more muddled, a little more hanging around that black line, that 1895 to 2024 average. However, we actually have seen more rainfall in recent decades here across the area. Not by much, but by a noticeable amount still. Snowfall, this is for Newark, and this goes back to the mid 1800s here. We have data back to then, and that's why I'm using this. And you see a long decline downward. In the mid to late 1800s, you could expect about 75% more snow than what we see now in Newark. And this is true for a number of different locations across New Jersey. We have, since 2000, seen a little bit of a gain in snowfall, but the longer term trend has been less snow. Why is that? Well, because we're seeing heavier snow. We're seeing more snow falling at once. And we're not seeing as much snow, in November or late March, where those snowfall totals are usually less. In other words, when it snows, it really snows, and when it rains, it's been more likely to pour as well. Now, drought, this is interesting because we haven't seen more drought, but we've seen more extreme drought and more extreme wet periods too. This goes back to 1895, and we see a good balance between dry periods and wet periods. However, if you look at the intensity of the reds on the upper part of the chart or the intensity of the blues on the bottom part of the chart, you'll see them getting more intense, those colors, as you go from left to right here, especially with the drought we had in 2024 into early 2025, which prompted a drought warning by the state. They set the policy, and we were in an extreme drought, or a level 3 of 4 drought, by the United States Drought Monitor. All right, let's look at tornadoes. Now, we have seen more tornadoes over time, but there's still plenty of years where we don't see any tornadoes. We average 2 a year in New Jersey, but there are years with 0 here, like we had in 2018. There's really no connection between more or less tornadoes and climate change. In fact, what's probably happening is that starting in the mid-80s, we had better access to cameras and eventually smartphones and webcams and all that stuff, where we can get and see more tornadoes, especially those weak ones that might be happening when most people are out of their homes and at work, or maybe places in the Pine Barrens where it's sparse. That being said, we're not really seeing a trend of more or less tornadoes over time. due to climate change. Now, hurricanes is kind of split. We are seeing more major hurricanes, category 3, 4, or 5 hurricanes, and more rapidly intensifying hurricanes, which means at least 35-mile-an-hour increase within 24 hours. And on those extreme rapid intensifications, at least 58 miles an hour increase in 24 hours, we're seeing that increase there too. Now, what we're not seeing are just more tropical cyclones and hurricanes. We've been pretty consistent. Now, what you're seeing on this chart here on the lower right in the red is the number of landfalling hurricanes. That's been about consistent, about 2 a year. Now, what you're seeing in the green and the orange are the total number of hurricanes. The orange line is adjusted for the what we call pre-satellite era. So from 1859 or 1860, I should say, until the mid 1960s, we didn't have satellites in the sky to see, a hurricane that might just be small in the open Atlantic, and there's no boats going past there. Of course, now we can see that with satellite. That yellow line, that orange line, adjust for it. And we really haven't seen much of an increase. So you have to look at the adjusted line from 1860 until it ends about 1965, 1970 or so, and then look at the green line and you see we don't have much of a change. When it comes to tidal flooding here, we'll have this video play for you. This was from a nor'easter in 2025. New Jersey is more than double the rate of sea level rise across the globe. We're at 17.6 inches from 1911 to 2019 here. And this chart shows that we're seeing many more times coastal flooding events in Sandy Hook and Atlantic City now than we did in the 1950s and 60s. I mean, it's a multiple of 6 here, the number of coastal flooding events we're seeing now compared to then. We're seeing more properties at risk of flooding. Now, why is that? It's partially due to climate change. It's partially due to that we just have more people along the beaches. Anywhere where you see those oranges are properties newly exposed to flooding since 1985, and that's the majority of properties that are at risk of frequent flooding or annual flooding. We can break this down by county, and Ocean County and Cape May County in particular have seen huge increases in its number of homes that have been built in flood-prone areas since the mid-1980s here. So we're seeing just generally more properties that would flood if there's a hurricane, 62 to 86,000. Again, part of that's climate change and sea level rise. Part of that is just more people at the shore. And homeowners insurance does not cover flood damage from hurricanes. It's important to know that here. So again, this isn't all climate change. We look at the annual sea level rise since 1960 in Atlantic City, and this can be used for most of the Jersey Shore. That is the dashed black line on this chart. It's running on the lower end of all those color lines you see on the chart, the yellows and the reds and the magentas. That means that we're on the lower end of sea level rise projections here. We're still seeing sea level rise, but we're not seeing it at the higher rates. So what is due to climate change? Well, 40% of it, really, it's due to thermal expansion. In other words, as the water heats up, it expands here. We're seeing melting ice sheets and melting glaciers as our climate warms. But 60% of it is not due to climate change in New Jersey. It's due to land sinking, due to the glaciers we used to have in the northern part of the state, which have retreated a long time ago, but we're still seeing the shifting land from that, and other causes for sinking land, mainly the Kirkwood-Cohansey Aquifer being drained out to use for our drinking water and for our farming, which we need here. But if you're in Ocean, Atlantic, or Cape May counties, we're seeing sinking land as that aquifer, that underground pool of water does shrink here and narrow. So there's a multitude of reasons for the sea level rise, and then that parlays into the coastal flooding as well. Yes, we're seeing more coastal flooding. Part of it's due to climate change. Part of it isn't, and part of it's due to man-made causes outside of climate change, such as the fact that most of our beach towns are densely populated with homes and sidewalks and roads, and that water just can't go anywhere. We need to build, and we are, for the most part, building more resilient to get that water out quicker. Here's another look at sea level rise prediction. So the red line is where we are in the 2025. The black dot is about where we are at the sea level rise. Again, on that lower end of the projections. And if you were to take this out to the year 2100, we would be somewhere at about, likely, there's an 83% chance we're at or above 3 feet of sea level rise by 2100. For more information here, you can go to the DEP's website, dep.nj.gov/climate change. Just note that this is the policy or the what to do about it, in addition to the facts and the forecast part of it as well. ClimateCentral.org does a great job of having easy to understand graphics on climate change, on a whole variety of topics. And here's a link here if you want to get your climate change fix or what to do or not to do about it in a game type version. So there's a website there also. You can follow me on any of these 3 QR codes. Make sure to check out our 24/7 Jersey Shore live weather channel. Whether it's the current conditions, tidal and marine forecasts, as well as any of the videos that I do, whether it's through weather or drone, you can find it all here, and you can find it for free on my YouTube channels or on my website, which again, you can find on these QR codes.